You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. And be sure to smash that like button. Well. Remember a couple of weeks ago when the college football world was a Twitter after Brian Kelly said we're not just in the business of paying players or buying players? And that's all anybody heard, even though he gave you a 3.5-minute, very thoughtful, context-laden answer, which, quite honestly, when you are an interviewer, that's what you crave. You want coaches who give you thoughtful, detailed answers, that they don't just default into coach speak and give you your common garden variety, standard pat processed answer. Yet, people crushed Brian Kelly because they basically purported it as, well, LSU doesn't do NIL, which was stupid and not at all right or real. But the comments that he made were in large part about the defensive linemen that LSU were recruiting, Dominic Williams and Simeon Barrow. And I took time and told you what transpired with those guys. Dominic Williams had a 7-figure ask. LSU wasn't going to meet that number. And so Dominic Williams ended up going to Oklahoma. I don't know how much he got. Good on him. I'm not criticizing him. LSU then, in turn, offered Simeon Barrow more than they had initially offered, the collective, more than they initially offered Dominic Williams. But Simeon Barrow maybe had a higher number in mind, and there was a staff member at the University of Miami who, let's say, knows LSU quite well because his son's on the football team, who didn't have the most kind things to say about LSU and their abilities in the NIL space. Well, here we are a couple of weeks later, and Matt Zenitz from 24/7 is reporting things are currently up in the air with transfer defensive lineman Simeon Barrow and Miami. Barrow, he notes, one of the top spring portal defensive linemen committed to Miami earlier this month. And he went on to add, if and when Barrow and Miami part ways, Missouri seems to be a team to watch as a possibility for him. I want to comment a little bit more about what is potentially ahead for Simeon Barrow, but I want to remind you, these were the comments Brian Kelly made a couple of weeks ago.
It hasn't fared very well, quite frankly, because, we're selling something a little bit differently. And that is, we want to recruit, we want to engage, build relationships, we want to develop, retain, and have success. We're not in the market of buying players. And unfortunately, right now, that's what some guys are looking for. They want to be bought.
LSU did add JVR Suggs from Grand Valley State. And at which point, Brian Kelly said LSU is no longer in the market for defensive linemen when he gave his interview to Scott Rabelais of The Advocate. That audio, by the way, was courtesy of Jacques Doucet and WAFB. Always give attribution, kids. And when Kelly spoke to Scott Rabelais, he was pretty clear. So we're not looking for defensive linemen in the portal anymore. They did obviously pull a punter out of the portal, but they do still have another roster spot if they want to pursue Barrow again. But Brian Kelly made the point. We're not in the business of just buying players. You want to recruit and develop and graduate. And Barrow had a very complicated history at Michigan State where he entered the portal 3 times and each time kept returning to Michigan State. This time he ultimately landed at Miami, and now he's back, apparently. Well, let me rephrase. He's not in the portal because he can't go in the portal. More on that in a second. But Barrow, it would appear, according to Matt Zenitz, is back on the market. Now, here's the complicated part for Simeon Barrow. Simeon Barrow is already enrolled at Miami, and the portal window is closed. So he cannot go back into the transfer portal at this point. There is no portal window. It's closed. And because he's already enrolled at Miami, the only way that he could go somewhere else at this point would be as a walk-on. He would have to leave Miami and potentially go somewhere as a walk-on. Now, you can massage that a bit because of NIL. You could effectively have an NIL deal that pays for his school, his tuition, everything you need, and effectively have another scholarship player just as a walk-on if you have the roster space, which you make space if that's the case. So is this something where LSU potentially kicks the tires again on Simeon Barrow? Or as Matt Zenitz reports, Missouri, it looks like that would be the landing spot. Is Missouri the spot ultimately where he goes? I don't know. Because I'm a little torn on this. On one hand, the player was good enough that you were recruiting him out of the portal because you were looking for starting caliber defensive linemen. And you didn't get that with JVR Suggs. You got a guy that's a Division II prospect that you hope can come in and maybe win a job or be part of your rotation, or we'll see. Barrow's a guy that was a starter in the Big Ten and a very productive player as well during his time there at the university or at Michigan State University. He had 110 tackles and 11 sacks over the last 3 years. So this is a productive player and a guy that's been a starter. So yes, you would like the player, but do you really want to compromise, as it would appear, what your approach to roster building is by now going back to the well with Simeon Barrow, who clearly is focused on one thing and primarily, which is NIL dollars. And I want to be clear again. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's the world in which we live. Those opportunities are there for young men and women if that's what they want to pursue. And if that's what they want to pursue, far be it from me or you or anybody to criticize them. So if that's what Simeon Barrow wants, okay. And that's not a problem. My only point is this, what is happening with Simeon Barrow, underscore, bold, italicized, exclamation point, exactly why Brian Kelly said what he said about LSU's approach to the portal. Yes, you're going to use the transfer portal. Yes, you're going to have NIL opportunities for student athletes and good NIL opportunities. But what LSU isn't going to do is just go write a check to pay someone's price who's only looking for a check. If somebody else will, great. And maybe it proves to be that's the way you do it. Maybe Ole Miss this year proves that's the approach that's going to work in the NIL portal era. Or maybe Brian Kelly's building something sustainable. So Simeon Barrow apparently is leaving Miami. Brian Kelly said they're done recruiting defensive linemen. But do you run it back with a guy who you brought here, you really liked, you offered a very handsome NIL opportunity to him, or do you watch him go to Missouri in your league? We'll wait and see in time. I have half a mind to say you need to improve your defensive line now. You need a starting caliber player, and he's one you added as a one-year mercenary. If it doesn't work out, it was a short-term deal anyway. No different than Denver Harris a year ago. Didn't work out, and now he's gone. Time will tell. But Brian Kelly seems pretty firm on how he wants to build his roster. It doesn't seem like that's the approach he wants to take. So we'll continue to follow it. But Simeon Barrow apparently not long for the University of Miami after all. I feel shocked. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.